The difference, though, between the stories that I'm trying to tell, on the best of my ability, is to tell positive stories. I want to talk about good things that are going on this planet, not the bad things, not the conflicts that we're running into. I want to talk about those folks who are making a change. And the Opus Prize recognizes these, would you say, modern day Mother Teresas, these change makers. It recognizes them with one each year winning $1 million to help with their cause, and two others, which are runner-ups, that get $100,000 each. I'm not involved with that part of the process at all. I just tell the story.
Welcome to Your Next Big Project is You, a podcast based around the theme of time. Time to be able to press pause on life. Time to reevaluate what's important. Time to reminisce about where you've come from, what you've learned, and what you've accomplished. Time to revisit your goals, dreams, and vision. And time to remember the people in your life. That's it, my friends. If you've got time, fasten your seatbelt and listen in as we discuss opportunities for the next 5 to 25 years of your life. And remember, your next big project is you. Welcome to our podcast. Your next big project is you. And man, do I have a special guest for everybody here today. Doug Rea. And it's important for me, as well as I know Doug, as a friend and really now a family member. In the spirit of complete transparency, Doug married my cousin. And so, Barbie, when you watch this someday, hopefully you'll sense the pride of your cousin and now talking to your husband here. But for everybody meeting Doug Rea for the first time, I usually don't do this, but I'm going to do this for Doug. And there's a paragraph in Doug's biography here, and listen to these credentials here. Doug Rea is a freelance still video certified aerial photographer, editor, multimedia producer for humanitarian and media organizations. And I'm going to stress humanitarian today as we get through this. Doug has shot stories, catch this, in Haiti, India, Indonesia, North and South America, Puerto Rico, Sub-Saharan Africa, produced stories in the Middle East and Europe. Images have been represented to a variety of news publications, including the New York Times, International Herald Tribune, the Washington Post, ESPN, Christian Science Monitor, Dallas News, Denver Post, USA Today. Do I need to go on with many of the organizations that Doug has been hired by as well, from Microsoft, and you can name it. Just go down the Fortune 500 list. You'll see a number of these that Doug has been brought in on assignments. Doug, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Leo. Glad to be here.
What an amazing journey, my friend. Jeez, this is like, I went through all of the stories that you've submitted on your website. I was moved to the point of calling my wife over a couple times, like, Ian, you have to watch this story that Doug did in Africa. You have to watch the story that Doug did in Haiti. You have to watch the story that Doug did in India. And tell us more about the journey, Doug, how you started from, the photographic, inquisitive curiosity with the camera to videography, and how it led into this whole Opus prize. Let's start there, please.
Well, Leo, it was a very humble beginning when I started photographing impoverished children in Southern Appalachia. And this was for the Appalachian Regional Commission and from some social workers that are working down there. My major in college was social work and sociology, minor and major. And photography was my tool. I was at odds with other people in the class who were just doing research or writing, but myself and another young photographer, which our whole careers have been based around photography, started me there. Years after that, I put that aside. I was a college professor for 3 decades at Rochester Institute of Technology, and I was doing primarily work for the Associated Press, doing motorsports photography. In 1990, my first wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she passed away in 1998 after close to a 9-year battle with breast cancer. She's a courageous woman. Um, I have 2 sons. Um, and for the 2 years after that recovery, I have no idea what I did between 1998 and 2000. I have no idea. I have no memory of it. I worked. I took care of my children. At that point, I had an 18-year-old and I had a 11-year-old. And it was one day, sometimes 1 hour at a time, grief-stricken. Years after that, I had the blessing of meeting my wife, Barb. Um, she's had a major change in me in life. And in addition to doing my motorsports photography in the first part of the new millennium, a fellow from the University of Rochester contacted me and said, I have a project I'd like you to work on in Ethiopia. And I said, well, I'm a full-time professor. I can do it during the summers or breaks, but I can't go away for 3, 4, 5 days. He said, it's on breast cancer. And I said, I'm in. I have a very strong commitment to that. Within 2 weeks, I was on a plane to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And that was the first time that I went back to what my beginnings were, which was documentary photography. And from that point on, through word of mouth, I worked with 3 other nonprofits. I carefully vetted them, make sure that these were honest business operations, that it wasn't taking money away and putting it in their pockets, but they were almost exclusively working for their clients, for the impoverished. And from that point forward, I started working for the Opus Prize, and I started working for Axios in France, and a new nonprofit called Team Lift. So working with those, and primarily for the Opus Prize, which you've seen most of my videos on the website, and I encourage anybody who's interested, take a look, send me an email if you have any questions. I'd be glad to answer them. That was a life-changing experience for me. I think I've done 13 or 14 stories all around the globe, primarily in Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, and throughout the United States. Everything from the homeless in Oakland to other areas that involve education and healthcare situations.
You know, it's amazing, Doug, because when you look at that chart behind me here, we've talked about this, and we talked about bringing like-minded, successful people together who have achieved a lot, have a lot, or are still looking for meaning in their life. When I look at what you've done in these stories that you've filmed, when I think of people who are living lives of significance, people who have tremendous abundance, meaning intentional stewardship of giving of their time, their talent, their treasures in many cases around helping some of these folks who are impoverished, as you said. I think of people of how it's helped me in terms of giving me perspective, which I talk about increasing sensitivity of what we have and what others don't have. As we sit here doing this podcast today, Russia's invading Ukraine while we're videoing this, right? So the whole world is on TV looking at what is going on. When people take the time to go in to look at your stories, there's a different sense of grief and of poverty and of people struggling, of people dying in pockets all around the globe that aren't being covered, that people don't know about, unless it's affiliated, Doug, with these humanitarian projects and the type of work that you're doing. Tell us more about Opus and what their charter is, and more about how that took you around the world. And when you said motorsports, I know there's a thrill seeker in you from riding bikes and things. And I'm watching some of these stories, and seeing, people with guns in the background. I can only imagine you with a passport going through local airports and,
Oh yeah.
no gravel roads into the jungles and things like this. I got to think thrill seeking for Doug Rea went to a whole other level than what you experience on a typical bike on a track. Tell us about
Well,
Opus and some of those journeys there.
I was approached by a good friend, Don Newrider, from the Opus Prize. He's the director of the Opus Prize until this last year. He just retired, as I did, from the Opus Prize. And Don had been working with him for 20 years. He saw what I had done in Addis Ababa on the breast cancer project and said, "Boy, if you're interested in working with us, we would sure like to bring you on board." So I was still working full time as a professor, had research projects going on, and I was dealing with clients on the outside, dealing on workflow and digital photography, digital capture, because that was the earlier part of my life before working in documentary photography. I was chasing digital imaging, and I was the pioneer for that at the university. Not loved for it because people love film. So I brought it in, and that was my passion for 15 years. Got me very tightly tied with big corporations doing consulting work, training, etc. And that was great. That was a transitionary point, but I needed to come back to the camera, Leo. I needed to come back to where my roots were, where my passion was, and start thinking about things other than making investments, how to save here, how to invest there, and those kinds of things. And that just grew and grew and grew. When I started working with the Opus Prize, it was pretty challenging. We talked about going to some countries that the CDC may not recommend that you would go to unless you take a lot of precautions. So with dealing with immunizations, preparations, how to change your diet, how to dress for these kinds of things, that's a big change in my life. So as I may have told you in the past, as a photographer, as a photojournalist, I tend to go at a story instead of run away from it. The difference, though, between with the stories that I'm trying to tell, on the best of my ability, is to tell positive stories. I want to talk about good things that are going on this planet, not the bad things, not the conflicts that we're running into. I want to talk about those folks who are making a change. And the Opus Prize recognizes these, would you say, modern day Mother Teresas, these change makers. It recognizes them with one each year winning $1 million to help with their cause, and two others, which are runner ups, that get $100,000 each. I'm not involved with that part of the process at all. I just tell the story. The board that makes those decisions on who is going to win the Opus Prize each year doesn't involve me. They don't get to see my work before they've made their decision, because I don't want to persuade them one way or another. I want to tell the story as I see it and the research that I've done on it. So that's moved into the point where I was getting more requests to travel than I could. Here's a good example of it. This was a part of the Opus Prize. I did this another pro bono activity. I built this book. They said on the 10th anniversary, we'd like you to cover the first 10 winners of the Opus Prize. I said, look, I'm a full-time professor. I can't do that. I can maybe cover one or two. Actually, I'd already covered one in example in Haiti, and another one in Malawi. So I hired some of my alums to help me with this. And it was a big project to put together a book about change makers. I had to hire youngsters who were probably in their early 30s, I would say, when they became adults, if you will. The new adult seems to happen around 28 to 30. I had to have people who had street smarts, who knew how to be safe in going into situations that may involve some danger, may involve dietary problems, those kinds of things. So that was the beginning of the second stage. Once I retired, I still hired some of these people to go to places that I wasn't able to go to. And I then learned that as media changed a lot for telling stories in the new millennium, I had to change from just making still photographs, Leo, to doing audio, video interviews, doing video work, and doing work with the drone. So we call that a one-man band, okay? I'm doing everything. And that's very challenging. Budgets were reduced. I wasn't in it for the money. I was reimbursed and paid on many of these projects, but it was mainly to help that organization serve the downtrodden, the impoverished.
Yeah. You know, as I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking about the last couple decades and how this took off. And if you can think about you sharing about losing your first wife to breast cancer, her legacy, as I think about what you're describing here and then getting involved, sending you to Ethiopia, almost, after a 2-year dark cycle with her passing, the legacy from my perspective now of hearing this as well is it's allowed you to not only to see what you can do for the cause of breast cancer and the awareness, but it's taken you around the globe, finding those modern day Mother Teresas,
right?
That in the spirit of, the passing of your wife opened up this whole other part of your life.
Right.
And you met a Mother Teresa in my family.
Right.
Meeting Barbie and Barbie meeting you in terms of your marriage for the last decade plus and what that's taken for you and stuff, how your life has changed and things. It's an amazing journey when I see this. Doug, there were a couple of these journeys that really stood out to me from watching all of the stories. And I know you and I were talking about that. The one trip to Ghana with Sister Stan Teresa Momini. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name. She's a modern day Mother Teresa as the story unfolds to do this. The Nazareth Home for God's Children. What just blew me away. I'm watching this. I had to watch it again. And when she's talking about how children are condemned if they have a disability or deformities, and they're viewed within the tribal community, is potentially having, witchcraft capabilities or wizard type of scenarios that in essence could be something that could haunt the tribe, and that these children literally are put to death.
Correct.
And so that's what I'm saying. We're in the midst of following a war on TV right now. And little do we know that on the western coast of Africa, in a small community, I mean, when you think about doing stories like this, you're a guy that's grown up with your eyes behind a camera in one way, shape, form, or another. In watching these scenarios and hearing these stories, how did that impact your life in a different way? Just being there, making sure you're being protected. You're taking a big risk in terms of all of these trips yourself. The more people, I encourage everybody to watch some of these stories. But Doug, how did that manifest to you from one trip to the next in terms of your takeaways? How it changed your thinking or your behaviors?
Well, as a photographer, as a storyteller with a camera, whether it's video or stills, doing recordings, etc., a lot of us essentially go into the zone. Okay. So in other words, when we get to a story, we've done our research in advance. We've learned as much as we possibly can from people that have gone before us, done the research, published it, whatever the case may be. And with that, it lets me focus in without being reckless in what I do. In other words, I pay attention to those children and those caregivers and those teachers. And I get into that zone for 2 or 3 days because I'm only there for 2 or 3 days max. I could spend a week there, Leo. The one you mentioned, both of those I could mention. I could spend, well, you didn't mention the second one yet. I think you have another two in your mind. I could spend a week or a month there to tell their stories. But as a photojournalist, in many cases, when budgets are limited, we only can go for a short period of time. Usually I was traveling with a group that was doing diligence on those organizations, but I broke away from the group and I did my photography, my own video and still images. There were few daunting moments when I was with a group, but when I was working with fixers in South America or in Ethiopia or other countries, that could be dangerous. Some things I didn't know about before I went. For instance, when I was in Vitória, Brazil, working on a project on microfinancing, outside of the large city of Vitória, which is a beautiful, gorgeous city. You look at it, you look at the hotel I'm staying in. Okay. This was extraordinary. I stayed in this really nice hotel. You go across the street and you go into poverty. And the higher you go up the hill, the greater the poverty is. And at the top of the hill, I found out the day I went out to shoot that my fixer, that's the person in the organization who helps me get access to my subject matter, my fixer said, we've made deals with the gangs. Deals with the gangs? I said, yeah, most of them are up on the top of the mountain. They're usually middle teenage, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, and they're carrying ARs, heavy weaponry. And I see these Jeeps running up with militia hanging off of them with M16s, just going to occurrences that take up place up in the mountain. That was a scary moment. But then when I met the people who I was photographing, it gave me a great sense of peace because I realized that being there, I had a sense of purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
And my purpose was to tell their story, trying to survive in a very difficult socioeconomic environment that most of the world has no idea of what's going on. They're too busy following major weather or environmental or political events. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've got to feel when you say most people, I've got to think after watching all of these documentaries or the stories that you videoed, if it would feel to me like 95% of the population are absolutely clueless.
Correct.
And I mean clueless on what you have seen in your travels. And you know what's interesting? You know, based on that last story that you just mentioned, one of the members of my faculty took a year sabbatical. She told me she traveled all around the globe. It's similar to like these stories of the higher up you go in the mountain, you know, more poverty, more risk as you're going up. But once you reach a certain level of an individual, she was telling me in places like Indonesia and some of the places like this, she said people who lived in just one room, like where I'm talking to you on my home office here in Arizona today, that literally a family living in a room like this, she said, were the happiest people.
Absolutely.
That had literally nothing in their lives other than their children and what little rice or whatever piece of bread or something that they can drink, were some of the most happiest, most fulfilled people that had nothing literally to show for in terms of material possessions. Right. Is that what you saw as well?
I saw it in two ways. I saw it when I was taken there by my fixer. And also, Leo, I would in certain situations go in unannounced to a family. There may have been language barriers. Usually there's somebody in the house who handles some form of English. And I experienced the same thing. Very strong family ties, a sense of cleanliness, living on next to nothing. Okay. Families 2, 3, or 4 generations deep living together in very small environments with a sense of hope, positive ideas, and positive life thinking process. It's a very life-changing experience for anyone who does it. And I'd recommend anyone who has lived a life, let's say, very successfully or very much the same thing, that they get out there and experience some of these things. And it can be done through their church. It can be done through other organizations. And we see these people that are really the background people behind the Mother Teresa's, if you will, as we both discussed. They are the background people who are helping out there. And we hear about some terrible things, most recently in Haiti. You know,
Right.
a church group was held there for quite a while. Actually, Father Frechette in Haiti from the St. Luke's Foundation was one of the negotiators that got those Americans freed, which was everything from adults to free children,
Yeah.
because this is the kind of lives that they live. So yeah,
Well,
it's
there was
very,
one. Yeah, there was
very
one
big
other
gift.
Doug, there was one other story that really hit my heart big time. And after raising 4 children, 3 daughters, soon to be 6 grandchildren, and 3 granddaughters right now, the story of Sister Marilyn Lacey of Mercy Beyond Borders down in South Sudan.
Right.
I'm watching this documentary or the video that she put together here and things. And I'm only imagining, I'm thinking, being in beautiful Buffalo, New York, or Scottsdale, and you're in Rochester, New York, how many languages do we speak, right? We speak English. And some people are fortunate that they've studied a secondary, third, fourth language. We're always wowed by people that speak this. And all of a sudden, she gets placed into this part of the world where they speak 42 different languages, that she says, a culture of neglect, a culture of violence, where she talked about, this is the one that hit my heart the most, of women being valued less than a cow.
Right.
Who in our society would have any understanding of that type of environment, that type of day-to-day living, where women were so at risk and so devalued? You talk about here, the plight of women being able to vote years ago, or equal rights, or things like this. And,
Right.
I'm talking about being considered, less than an animal.
Right.
I mean, did you remember anything from that trip that stands out from what I'm talking about here?
I don't remember anything from that trip, Leo, because I didn't go on it. Okay.
Oh,
And I wanted to go, but Sister Fitzgerald said, there's no way you can go. I can't bring anybody into these areas. She would say, first of all, are you married? I said, yes. She said, do you have any children? I said, yes. She said, do you have any grandchildren? I said, yeah, I have a couple real young ones. She said, then you can't go, because
wow.
there's no way I can guarantee you're going to come back. She said, let me try to get images for you. You do the editing. We'll do the interview over in Haiti, because her organization is both in Western Haiti as well as the South Sudan. Okay. And it was a difficult thing. I really wanted to go, but there's where the risk factor was just too high.
Wow. Well, that's good to share for people that go onto your site and see that story, that backdrop about
Right.
danger and risk. And as much of the thrill seeker that you are, when you're getting guidance, like those qualifying questions there, and how you were able to take the story then and edit it for Opus prize considerations, and really bring the story to folks like me and to the general public, to increase our awareness and sensitivity. And again, the big thing I talk about is just having perspective, that there's a lot of people around the globe that are really challenged day to day to live, to survive, to get educated, to be able to deal with famines, or to be able to be fed in terms of poverty and issues like this. Well, you've really seen it, Doug. What an amazing gift that you've given us today to educate a lot of the folks that are listening to the podcast about your next big project being you, to awaken them today. Your work, I know, just needs to be taken to a whole nother level of appreciation, and for people to really look at these things, and when they're counseling their children, or when they're looking in their backyards, or in their pools, or their country clubs, or whatever, to remember that you're bringing stories to us of the plight of poverty and what people around the globe in areas that we never ever hear of are going through. I can't thank you enough, Doug, for your time and for sharing these wonderful stories with us today. What a value, and how privileged I am to have you in my life as well, buddy.
Same here, Leo. One thing I wanted to add to you, it's you talk about the next big project is you. Well, we're going to turn that back now. I've been telling stories for the Opus Prize and a few other organizations like Team Lift and Axios. But we're now working on a book. It is a book to be published that talks about these Mother Teresas of the modern day and how did they get from their beginnings to become those special people. In other words, how did they redefine their lives? They didn't stay in the same place. So in other words, how did a Father Rick Frechette, or as you mentioned, the sisters and some of the other folks that are at my website, how did they get there? What things happened in their youth? What happened in their middle life? Because some of them came out of business, some of them came out of academia, some of them came out of medical practice. There's doctors there. Some of them came out of more ordinary lives, but there were things in their lives that helped them get to that next stage. So when people turn 50s, 60s, and older, sometimes they don't realize what great opportunities are there for them. And it's a life of service. How can they give back to an area that involves poverty, medical care, disease, warfare, living conditions? All this stuff is being threatened. And like you said, Leo, the general public is not aware of that. They're not aware. Our book,
Right.
I'm working on this with Don Newreiter, who I had mentioned earlier, Don Newreiter. This book will look at profiles of each of these individuals, not what they've done, but how did they get to a life of service. So I'll keep you in touch with that. I hope that fits right in with your Sabbatical X seminar, because I think you're doing great things with people who have tremendous ability to redefine themselves at whatever stage they are in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doug, thanks so much. What a privilege today.
My pleasure.
Stay well, stay close, my friend, and we'll be looking forward to the book. All the best.
All
to
right.
you. Thank you.
Take care. Talk to you again, Leo.